Welcome to the DroidDevCast, a podcast brought to you by the team at Esper, bringing you the latest news, thoughtful discussion, and insights into all things Android, Android DevOps, and open source software development. I'm your host, Rin Oliver, Content Marketing Manager at Esper, and today I'm joined by Yadhu Gopalan, CEO at Esper.io. We're here this week to learn more about Android DevOps and specifically why it matters to those working with single-purpose devices. To wrap up the show, we'll dive into how Esper is architected for Android single-purpose use cases and is uniquely suited to DevOps for Android. So with that said, let's get started. Yadhu, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's good to join you too.
So can you speak a bit as to how Esper became an Android DevOps technology and why we don't position ourselves as an MDM?
Sure. And it really starts out with kind of a little bit of my background. I spent about 20 years building some form of devices. It started off building the operating system for Windows Embedded, which became the kind of the underlying operating system for Windows Phone, Windows Automotive, even Sega Dreamcast, etc. And then moved on to Amazon, where we did all the Fire OS devices. And then I did one of the projects, a really cool project was the Amazon Go, which is also a bunch of devices in a store. And out of all this, I was rebuilding what I called the infrastructure for deploying and monitoring these devices. And we would either update them or completely build them new because they were a different system. And one of the key things I noticed that is even while we were rebuilding, teams would have to wait until these engineering resources could build these systems in order to have a really full functional deployment and monitoring. This was at companies with great engineering resources, and they can put it to kind of use in this type of way. And it dawned on me that this could be a really important enabler for companies that don't have an engineering team that they can leverage, or they wanted to get going really from day one on using an infrastructure like this. And that's really kind of the place where we start off with as something for the engineering team to get started with. And therein lies also the kind of the differentiation that we're making between an MDM and DevOps. And the idea of DevOps is really supporting these dedicated single-purpose devices. They're mission critical, they're revenue generating, and they're either owned or managed by the team building them. They need total control of these devices. And they're highly involved in what applications run, how they run, what is the health of the applications, what is the health of the system, the hardware that they're running on. And an MDM doesn't solve this problem. An MDM, if you think about it, kind of right from the terminology itself, it's called mobile device management. And its history comes from supporting enterprise BYOD, or bring your own devices, where individual brought devices to be connected to the enterprise. And IT team wanted to manage or enforce what happens on these devices. So completely different kind of use case. It's obviously been adopted in some cases for this particular, what I call, where we are trying to do DevOps. But lots of companies continue to try to either put together something, or they just really have a difficult time of managing these devices. And that's where we want to kind of address this big gap.
Perfect. Thank you. That sounds wonderful. Why does the MDM model and technology fall short when it comes to managing single-purpose devices such as KOSU?
It's really about like the target customer. MDMs are meant for IT teams and that simply manage a device. And DevOps is meant for as a service that can be utilized jointly by the engineering team as well as the operations team. We think of this as part of the product, not something that's bolted on as an afterthought. It informs, like a DevOps model informs how the devices are going to be deployed, the application and the contents are going to be managed, and how it's going to be monitored. And finally, when things do go wrong, how is the application, the device, how is it going to be diagnosed and debugged? And that's really, MDM doesn't solve this problem. It's meant to control your email, your Office applications or whatever, and configure the VPN setting so that you can join securely to the system. Yes, you can deploy an application, but that's all you can do. You can't figure out how it's going to get deployed. How you can't tell what version gets deployed. You can't really tell how, what the scaling rollout plan is going to be. What a DevOps solution is supposed to help you do is tightly control that, reduce the blast radius, figure out if you need to do rollbacks, and it really build on top of what the best practices are for like managing your deployments. And this is something that's like available like in many forms on cloud services and application. And it's really all about bringing that to dedicated devices and Android dedicated devices.
Fantastic. And what are the consequences of trying to use MDM for single-purpose devices?
I really think of this as something like equivalent of fitting a square peg in a round hole. MDM, it's all about like mobile device management, and you're really not managing this thing. It needs to be thought of like as a philosophical model of how you deploy your applications and kind of build in automation. So you should do less time like managing the devices. If you're gonna have large fleets, hundreds of thousands of devices, 500,000 devices, this needs to be part of your build systems, integrated into your overall workflow. And that's really what we're trying to do, is less on managing, more on engineering. And that's kind of in a nutshell is like, how do you automate? How do you figure out what needs to be monitored and put that into your dashboards, etc.?
That makes a lot of sense. And what are some differences that are both theoretical and tactical between MDM and Android DevOps?
Think about, like, here's a really simple example of an Android, like a DevOps would have. You would have pipelines where you would stage your deployment. You would roll it out. You would control the flow. You would want to be able to segment your fleet in a really tactical manner and manage the deployment in an automated fashion. MDMs just don't really do that. It's all about an IT team that may not, like enabling teams that don't know anything about the application that you're developing. This is our target audience. We really are. It's like to go to the engineering team, and an MDM is meant for an IT team. And when you're building your device, you're deploying your device, you want total control over what the application that's going to be deployed. It's the tail end of your development process.
And what are the advantages of DevOps for Android for somebody actually using this in their own Android workload? What are those advantages that they can see from having a DevOps perspective?
It's about how your daily engineering workflow happens. It's how you connect it to the rest of your kind of systems. The reason why these Android devices exist is because there's a product, and this team is building a product, and you need a DevOps solution to enable that product. It's not general purpose device that's kind of come in. It's a truly a product that they're building, whether it's a consumer facing product or something that's used in a business. It's a product, and you need a DevOps solution that can kind of manage that in a highly controlled manner and integrated with your backend system, integrated with your application. So it's all kind of one piece of the overall product puzzle.
That makes perfect sense. And how does Esper's architecture lend itself to DevOps?
First of all, like Esper from the ground up is built to manage these dedicated devices, dedicated devices and dedicated these fleets at scale. It's meant to kind of be really accurate, highly deterministic. You need to know when a device is online, what the state of the device is, then understand what the current versions of your applications are on there. And in this field, it's very typical. Customers are going to do slow rollouts of everything from applications to settings changes, etc. And you need to understand what is your state of your rollout. And really, like, this is something I didn't touch on, is like at any time you have dedicated devices that are geographically distributed and are remote, things go wrong. And you want to be able to do this at the comfort of your desk in your office, or in these days at your home. And Esper has this infrastructure capability to remotely diagnose, remotely debug your application. And you can be sitting in your office in San Francisco, debug a device live in Melbourne.
That's amazing. So for people that are having to debug their issues in real time from a remote location, what are some of the things that Esper offers them in terms of creating that CI/CD experience and being able to have that continuous iterative workflow when they're developing applications for Android?
This is a really good question. And so it's really about, you've got your application built and you've got it tested locally. you've got your build system, and then from the build system, Esper can take over, put together your deployment pipeline for your fleet of devices. And then once as the devices are deployed, you're going to monitor these devices. You're going to look at what's more critical to you based on your application telemetry or your system telemetry. And there's also hardware telemetry. And we understand that application that you tested locally might not work correctly in the field because of environmental changes, because of particular Wi-Fi, etc., things like that. Or it could be even a different hardware revision that went out there. Could be a different OS or system revision that's out there. So there's a plethora of differentiation that happens in the fleet that are different from what you locally did. And that's the final stage. And you want to figure out what happened and diagnose that. And then you can do that from your same tool that you used when you were doing your local testing. You bring that up, you debug your application, you understand what's wrong, you fix it, you do another rollout. That's, if you really wanted to, you can even target devices in that type of environment, in that type of OS to reduce the blast radius again, and before you do a full-fledged rollout. So this is the power that we kind of give to really accelerate your continuous deployment, continuous integration for devices. It's something that we take for granted on the cloud. And it's really been hard for people to do. People end up testing for months, really break that whole model of continuous development and integration. And we want to bring that to these devices.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the DroidDevCast. We'll be back next week with another exciting show for you. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode on social media. You can also follow us on Twitter at EsperDev and subscribe to our YouTube channel to keep up with all the latest happenings here at Esper. You can listen to the DroidDevCast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Simplecast, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you again for listening.